Star Trek brings back Captain Picard's TNG Enterprise like Generations Never Happened. Star Trek: The Next Generation's USS Enterprise D and LT, Commander Data, Brent Spiner, are back in Star Trek Lower Decks, and apparently Star Trek Generations never happened for this version of Captain Jean-Luc Picard's Patrick Stewart Galaxy-class starship. Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 7, Fully Dilated, continues the USS Cerritos' mission of plugging holes that lead to other Star Trek timelines. A new rift in dimensional space briefly brings an alternate universe purple USS Enterprise D into the Prime timeline. In Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 7, Fully Dilated, Lieutenants Beckett Mariner, Tawny Newsome, Devanna Tendi, Noel Wells, and Tlyn Gabrielle Ruiz undergo a Starfleet surgical procedure for an away mission to Dilmer 3, a primitive pre-warp civilization. During their mission to rid Dilmer 3 of debris from the purple USS Enterprise D that could violate the Prime Directive, the lower deckers encounter the severed head of LT, Commander Data, who Tendi reactivates. But this Data lived a different life from Star Trek's Prime Timeline android. Apparently, Star Trek Generations has not happened yet in the purple dimension where the purple LT, Commander Data, is from, if it ever will. Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5 takes place in 2381, 10 years after the events of Star Trek Generations. Not only did Star Trek Generations see Captain Picard meet Captain James T. Kirk, William Shatner, and witness Kirk's death, but the Galaxy-class USS Enterprise D was destroyed by Klingons, with the saucer section crash landing on Viridian 3. However, in the alternate Star Trek Purple Dimension, the USS Enterprise D was never destroyed, and it's 10 years later when it happened in Star Trek Generations. Data also died in Star Trek Nemesis, which took place in 2379, just 2 years before Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5. But Data is alive and well in the Purple Dimension, so Star Trek Nemesis never happened either. Data is also still a lieutenant commander, which indicates Commander William Riker, Jonathan Frakes, is still first officer of the Enterprise and hasn't become captain of the USS Titan. The most likely explanation for Star Trek Lower Decks' Purple Dimension is that Star Trek The Next Generation is still happening in the alternate reality, and their time isn't current with time in Star Trek's Prime universe. If Captain Picard ever commands a purple USS Enterprise E, it would be because the Enterprise D is destroyed, but it's possible Star Trek Generations doesn't happen at all in the Purple Dimension. It's also possible none of the Star Trek The Next Generation movies happen or occur considerably later in the Purple Dimension. Curiously, the purple LT Commander Data tells LT, Devanna Tendi, that his head has been severed before, and the android recounts the events of the Star Trek The Next Generation Season 5/Season 6 two-parter Time's Arrow, when Data and the USS Enterprise D crew time travel to 19th century San Francisco. Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5, Episode 7 is actually the second instance when Purple Data's head is severed from his body. But Data and Purple LT Commander Geordie LaForge, LeVar Burton, are still best friends, so it's nice to see some things don't change regardless of alternate timelines. In the annals of Star Trek history, few ships are as iconic as the USS Enterprise D, helmed by the legendary Captain Jean-Luc Picard. With its sleek saucer section and unique futuristic design, it was the flagship of the Federation in Star Trek The Next Generation (TNG), a symbol of hope, exploration, and humanity's highest ideals. When it met its untimely destruction in Star Trek Generations, 1994, fans were left with a bittersweet farewell to the ship that had become a beloved character in its own right. However, what if the Enterprise D never met its end? What if Star Trek decided to bring it back, and with it, Captain Picard's legacy, as if the events of Generations never happened? This speculative return of the Enterprise D, restored to its former glory, would be a bold move, one that repositions Picard, Riker, and the rest of the crew in a narrative that transcends the need for destruction or loss. It would rewrite the future of Star Trek in a way that bridges nostalgia with fresh storytelling, while honoring the spirit of exploration that the Enterprise D represented. Why bring back the Enterprise D? For many fans, the loss of the Enterprise D in Generations felt unnecessary. a plot device to facilitate the transition from television to cinema. The ship was lost during a battle with the Duras sisters, a Klingon faction that proved no match for the crew's intellect. Yet, a technical vulnerability in the ship's design allowed the enemy to disable the Enterprise's shields and ultimately crash the saucer section onto a planet. While it provided a thrilling climax for the film, it also left a deep scar in the hearts of Trekkies who had followed the ship for 7 seasons of TNG. Bringing back the Enterprise D could serve several purposes. First, it offers a form of redemption for the ship and the crew. Rather than ending with a wreckage, the story could continue with a repaired or rebuilt Enterprise D, symbolizing the Federation's enduring commitment to peace and exploration. The ship was more than a vessel, it was a home, a place where diplomacy, science, and discovery converged. Additionally, the return of the Enterprise D could bring Picard's journey full circle. In Star Trek, Picard, we see a more reflective, older Picard grappling with the consequences of his decisions and the weight of his legacy. Reviving the Enterprise D in this context would serve as a metaphor for rejuvenation, both for Picard and for the Federation. It could represent a return to the optimism of TNG, while allowing new stories to unfold aboard the familiar starship. Narrative possibilities: if Star Trek were to bring back the Enterprise D and ignore the events of Generations, it opens up exciting possibilities for storytelling. Instead of the Enterprise E, which was introduced in the films following Generations, the crew could reunite on the bridge of their original ship. This creates a poignant connection to the past while enabling the series to explore new frontiers in the future. One compelling narrative approach could be to explore a what-if scenario in which the destruction of the Enterprise D never happened. Perhaps, in an alternate timeline, the events of Generations were altered by a temporal anomaly, something Star Trek has never shied away from using. In this timeline, the Enterprise D continues to serve as the Federation's flagship, and Picard and his crew are once again at the forefront of galactic events. Alternatively, the ship could be rebuilt in the Prime timeline, reflecting Starfleet's evolving technological capabilities. A story arc involving the painstaking restoration of the ship could be a celebration of the legacy of TNG, as Starfleet engineers, many of whom were inspired by Picard's generation, work to restore the ship. It would be an emotional tribute to the crew's legacy and the ship that carried them across the stars. There's also the potential for entirely new stories involving diplomatic missions, first contact scenarios, or scientific exploration, classic Star Trek fare that made TNG so beloved. Rather than focusing on war or conflict, the return of the Enterprise D could signal a return to the optimistic vision of the future that Star Trek once championed. This would be a refreshing contrast to some of the darker, more introspective stories that have emerged in recent Star Trek series. Character reunions and growth: one of the most exciting aspects of bringing back the Enterprise D would be the opportunity for character reunions and growth. Seeing Picard reunited with Riker, Data, Worf, Geordi, Troy, and Dr. Crusher aboard their original ship would be a powerful moment for fans. It's a chance for the characters to reflect on how far they've come, both as individuals and as a crew. For Picard in particular, returning to the Enterprise D would be deeply symbolic. He has spent years reflecting on his decisions, his role in Starfleet, and his personal life. Stepping back onto the bridge of the Enterprise D would remind him and the audience of the hope and optimism that defined his tenure as captain. It would allow him to continue his journey of redemption and rediscovery with the ship that carried him through some of his most iconic adventures. Conclusion: a return to hope bringing back the Enterprise D, as though Generations never happened, would be a bold decision for Star Trek,